Hello, I'm Marcia Kavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. Well, not to be a spoiler, but we already know that one of the best things about 2021 was that it created distance from the horrid 2020. Now we pause to look back at 2021, including some of the top news items as well as an investigation about those whose time is measured from a jail cell. We'll also look at the year's top business stories. Joining us are tonight's Informed Sources. Errol Laborde, producer of Informed Sources. John Simermann, reporter, the Times-Picayune, the New Orleans Advocate. And Kim Singletary, managing editor, Biz New Orleans Magazine. And let's go on over to Errol right now. And just sort of generally, you wanted to take a look at the top stories for year 2021.
Yeah, a little bit later we'll be looking at top business stories. So these are the top stories that aren't necessarily business, right? But certainly part of our business. Number one, of course, remains COVID. It just dominates everything. It's just dominated all the news. A different sort of thing than last year, because last year we didn't know really what we're dealing with and where we're going, and we're worried about hospital rooms and respirators and all of that. At least there's something in place. It's just a question of getting people to take those shots and put on the mask. So I think this year we saw some kind of a sense of progress, and it's just moving along, but it's a lot slower than anticipated. But ultimately, it dominates all news. It dominates sports news. It dominates business news. I know on this show, and we sat down to plan the week. Well, what's first? COVID. And so it's still there, and we hope we will. That this time next year, we won't be talking about it. Next on the list is Hurricane Ida. Hurricane Ida, I think, caught a lot of people off guard. The devastation it did, especially in the St. John Parish and the southeast Louisiana and down into Grand Isle, which is something. But you know, I'll always remember about Hurricane Ida is that Saturday night when it hit. I think a lot of us were feeling a little bit smug because this was going to be a real test about how the levee systems from Katrina work. And we're feeling kind of good because it looked like that the levees were working, and they did. We weren't counting on with the utility towers. And, you know, listening to radio and all of a sudden hearing this report saying all these utility towers have fallen into the lake, into the river. Yeah. It reminded me of that moment on the night of Katrina when if everything is fine except the levees have just broken. You know, listening to the news and all of a sudden something really bad. And, you know, when we first heard that story about the towers, we didn't know what that meant. I mean, it's not an issue. A lot of people didn't even know there were utility towers. And, you know, it's talk this might be 8 months. I mean, imagine a city with a long period of time without electricity. It was a very depressing moment. I mean, it looked like almost a death blow for the city. Fortunately, that was dealt with a lot quicker than we thought. But man, the people in St. John Parish and in those river parishes, it's still tough. The elections didn't yield a lot of surprises. Certainly in the mayor's election, it's not uncommon that for a second-term election for a mayor of New Orleans, that person gets elected fairly easy, which happened with LaToya Cantrell. But it's also when people start positioning themselves for future mayoral elections. And we saw the emergence of J.P. Morrell from the Senate becoming a council member at large. We saw the reemergence of Oliver Thomas, who at one time in his life was really widely anticipated to be the next mayor, whether or not that happens. But anyway, we saw some new people that were moving into the picture. The next story I put in, and I call Mardi Gras improvisation. You know, we had a situation where the parades were called off, and I think people, you know, felt pretty down about that. But I always include Mardi Gras this year in the review list because it has a huge economic impact and a social impact in New Orleans. But what was so refreshing about what happened by not having parades was the creativity and adapting with it. Those house decoration things were just incredible and caused a lot of excitement around the town. What happened in City Park in terms of having that float parade where you were the parade and you rode by the floats, and the music that came out, there was just a lot of spirit. And so we really dealt with it, I thought, in a creative way. And then the other thing, and kind of the downer in the list, is shootings. That shootings just continue. Now, not all necessarily murders, but they're shootings. They're people shooting each other. We see a lot by highway escape, by interstates. We see a lot of what appears to be gang shootings. I personally witnessed a shooting on Canal Street one night. And what I thought about it is that the victim was able to get away, and he ran away, and the shooter got away. But how blasé everybody was about it. It was like, oh, a shooting. Life moves on, and so maybe it's something that we've become a little bit too used to.
Oh, yeah, well, violent crime definitely in the city. We are seeing an uptick. We did see a rise in the homicide rates for this year. And then carjackings was something that really went up. Not necessarily always involving a shooting, but just carjackings.
Yeah.
People, being assaulted and their vehicle being taken away. And you mentioned Ida. Of course, that was just such an experience because so many of us stayed here. And, we had to live through that night of horrible winds, walk out to see what the damage is. And another area that was really hurt and still is trying to recover certainly is Lafourche. You mentioned St. John, but Lafourche Parish really had, took it hard.
Yeah, all of southeast Louisiana just took a real hit. And you got to think like the people who live around the area of Grand Isle. Do you need to reevaluate this in terms of the future of that area and what you're going to do? But yeah, it's really pretty discouraging. A lot of these people, they could think hard about moving back into those areas too. I was talking to somebody from Lake Charles. I mean, Lake Charles was the year before, and he was saying the recovery in Lake Charles is going very, very slow, and that there are a lot of people. He says a lot of people just left the community. They said we don't want this. We don't want this again.
With COVID also, year 2020 was just so difficult, lockdown, scary time, and it was frightening. With the beginning of 2021, we really saw the vaccines come onto the market and become available for everybody. So that has given people a little bit more security, but we really haven't seen the vaccination rate go up to what public health officials had hoped.
Who would have thought that would become a big issue? Back in 2020, when they was talking about vaccinations, I thought the big thing would be people clamoring to get their vaccinations. If there was a big issue, it'd be people fighting to get in line to get their place, and it's just not been that. That the vaccinations have been easy to get, but still there are these people who are just resisting getting it.
In those first weeks, I can remember, particularly for the group of 60 or 65 and older, it was kind of that situation. People, rushing to get their vaccinations. They're trying to make their appointments, driving miles and miles and miles to get their vaccination, and then it really all kind of slowed down. And with the Mardi Gras improvisation, as you said, and seeing all the house floats and everything. Another thing, too, and it certainly happened in 2020, but continued over to 2021, is neighbor helping neighbor, or groups of people coming together to help other groups of people or figure out some kind of way where musicians could be employed, where float builders and artists could be employed. That was really a big thing in 2021 as well.
And part of the idea behind the house decorations, more beyond just the beauty of seeing the house decorations, was that when it was done, they would sell some of the parts to raise money for the artists. And so it was also a fundraiser to apply for them. Again, it's a beautiful tradition, and I hope it just stays and grows.
Okay, E, thanks a lot. Let's move over to John right now. And over at the paper, you guys have been taking a look at, in a series, you've been doing reports about long-time prisoners, people, lifers. And some people given life sentences for what we would consider maybe not to be that major crime, but they were multiple billed, and so that's why they're there. So what are you finding out?
Well, we did this series with the Marshall Project, which is a national investigative criminal justice operation, and a colleague of mine, Leah Skeen, from The Advocate, looking at our life without parole population, which is much more of our prison population than it used to be. We had a bunch of criminal justice reforms over the last 4 years that have really whittled down more even than projected the population of prisoners, which was long nation leading. And last year we ducked under Mississippi slightly. We're still near the top, but our rate has gone down significantly. Our prison population has gone down from a peak of 40,000 a decade ago to 27,000 more or less. It may even be a little bit under. Some of that is a little bit deflated, I think, by COVID. But those are almost all nonviolent convictions and people and defendants who are getting shorter sentences on the front end, shorter sentences on the back end. The result of that is that most of the reduction has been in nonviolent offenses. There have been some sort of a few hundred lifers that have gotten parole eligibility. What makes Louisiana different is we're the nation's per capita leader in life without parole sentences. In other words, you never get out. And so we wanted to look at that population and see what that's doing to the overall prison population. Now, life without parole sentences make up 1 in 6 Louisiana prisoners. Your average lifer is a 52-year-old, or your typical lifer is a 52-year-old black man who's been in about 20 years. So, what's happening to our population is getting smaller and getting older fast, really. Those are some of the more expensive prisoners. So you do have cases. The biggest driver, one of the big drivers that Leah Skeen wrote about is our second-degree murder statute, which is a lot broader than other states, almost every other state, in terms of life without parole applying to second-degree murder. So you can have gangland shootings, result in life without parole sentences. But you can also have killings where, they were unintentional. Or in the case Leah wrote about, you had a couple after Katrina who fed their baby cow's milk while they were evacuated, and the baby ended up dying. And it was a very tragic story, and there's, there was negligence involved, and so there was a crime attached to the killing that made that a life crime, and those two people are still in prison. So there are sort of outliers like that a little bit, and but there's a whole host of killings that in other states would not necessarily be a life without parole crime.
So what you're saying, though, there are some folks in jail, life without parole, for maybe a nonviolent crime. So why are they there?
Well, we had laws since the 90s that are habitual offenders, who, and to be fair, the prosecutors, the DAs, and it's been a bipartisan kind of reform effort, and they've chipped away at some of those most egregious cases. But last week, a guy named Clarence Simmons, 88 years old, gets out of prison after 31 years. He was convicted in his last conviction for stealing or possession of stolen camera and a tripod. He was only let out because the DA in Caddo Parish agreed to it. There was nothing in the law that allowed him to get out. And you see DAs in some areas, not just in New Orleans, where Jason Williams has let out probably 40 or more life prisoners, or agreed to the release of about 40 life prisoners. There are other DAs around the state. In Caddo Parish, which has long been considered James Stewart, who's the DA up there, has been for a couple of years. He's black, and he's taken a new look at some of these, what you would consider maybe excessive sentence cases. Even Warren Montgomery in St. Tammany, even Paul Connick in Jefferson Parish, here and there, have taken new looks at some of these. So the habitual offender portion of the life prison population is about 300. About half of those have nonviolent offenses as their last offense that they committed.
There's a lot to be considered with all of these when you say, they're being revisited and another look is being taken. For those who maybe were victims, or their family members were victims of crime. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I'm sorry.
With your earpiece, that's okay.
Okay, go ahead.
All righty. For those who perhaps were victims, or maybe their family members of victims, what generally is the feeling for sentences to be revisited?
It varies. I mean, certainly you have family members of victims who are very upset by the idea that these people would get out. You have victims' family members who feel like they're the ones that are handed the life sentence. And so why should these people sort of get any kind of benefits? But then you have people who have come to understand that, or come to, it's been 40 or 50 years maybe that somebody has been in prison, and they think it's okay, and then you have everything in between, really.
Mm-hmm. So prisoners who have some serious health issues, who have been there for a long time, are now really up in age, are we seeing the release of those?
Well, in dribs and drabs, there are a few programs, medical treatment, furlough. The people that are convicted of first and second degree murder don't get access to medical parole, which is another thing they do. And then at the very end, there's compassionate release, but that's really when people are on death's door. So there are ways of doing that. But yeah, there's, according to state corrections, overall the number of Louisiana prisoners 60 or older has risen by half since 2013. And you see that's where the prison medical costs come in. They're rising. They've risen 20% in 5 years, over $100 million. And you talk to, corrections will acknowledge that's where a lot of that money goes, is to that older population that is only getting older.
Well, this has been a multi-part series that you guys have been reporting on. So will this series be continuing?
Well, I'm sure we'll be writing about some cases going forward, off of this.
Okay. All right, John. Very interesting. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Kim, over to you. And there, of course, have been this business news, big business news, and so you are going to tell us about what you consider to be the biggest business stories of year 2021.
Yeah, we cover this every year in Biz New Orleans magazine. We look through the entire year and come up with kind of the big shots, the Big 10, and the hardest part is putting them in some kind of an order, so they kind of go all over the place.
That's okay.
But yeah, I would say number 10 we had as the hits in hospitality that just kept coming. I mean, it obviously started, like Errol said at the beginning, with COVID, and all the restrictions in place and everybody staying home that obviously hurt businesses. And then just as they were starting to recover in the summer and we were starting to see some hope, things kind of went backwards, and we ended up with vaccine mandates and mask mandates, and we were hearing from businesses that those really just slammed them, and all of a sudden they were not seeing the people anymore. And then obviously when the events get closed downtown, that hurts businesses downtown as well. So all of that happening, and then of course Ida comes along. So and they lost a lot of businesses lost a lot of produce and just had supply chain issues, continue to have supply chain issues. So that just keeps coming.
And then with hospitality, did we take a big hit in the conventions too coming into town?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely huge. And so if you think about all those businesses downtown, they all rely on those conventions. That's hundreds and hundreds of people that come in at a time. Yeah,
it's been really tough for them. Okay, let's go to number 9 now.
Number 9, we had the consolidations in healthcare. So obviously Ochsner is a big one. Ochsner consolidated with a company out of Mississippi called Rush, and it's now Ochsner Rush Health. So they did a huge consolidation there. And then the big news, LCMC buying East Jefferson Hospital was a huge move. But Ochsner and LCMC continue to expand. They continue to be huge forces for us on the healthcare side.
Okay, next up on your list?
Number 8, that was the Six Flags redevelopment. That was obviously a really long time coming, since about 2009. I think they've been trying to fill that 227-acre space. Drew Brees and some people got a lot of attention for coming up with an idea. But then out of nowhere, we had somebody else jump in, Troy Henry, with a group they call Bayou Phoenix. And they ended up coming in and really doing their research and really talking to people. And they ended up, taking it and winning it. So hopefully what we're going to see is a project that uses about 40% DBE, disadvantaged business enterprises, which was a huge part of their winning this project. There's going to be a lot of restaurant, residential and entertainment uses. That's supposed to include a sports complex, a water park, a hotel, a travel center, just a bunch of different things that will hopefully bring some more energy back to that area that's long been needing it.
Okay, number 7.
Number 7, that's video games. That was a global video game company that has come into town called Possibility Space. It is a big player in the industry, Jeff Strain. He has moved his company from the West Coast, which is very well known for all of this stuff, to Louisiana. His wife went to Loyola, and he really likes the area, so he wanted to come in here. It's big for many reasons. It's 75 new jobs is what's been estimated, but these are jobs that average pay about $100,000 a year. So they're not what you typically hospitality jobs. They're more on that entertainment. They're more on that tech side that we really need. And it's something that Governor Edwards called a game changer for us. So we are hoping to see more and more of that, people taking advantage of those tax credits.
Exciting that they're coming here. Number 6.
Yeah. Number 6 is the Entergy battles. Errol alluded to that a little bit in the beginning. Yeah, Entergy here is a very unusual situation in that they are regulated by the city council. Usually they're regulated by a state commission.
So that's Entergy New Orleans. Entergy New Orleans.
Entergy New Orleans.
Yes.
Yes. Entergy New Orleans is regulated by the city council. And so that has been a lot of battles. And then obviously with Ida, that felt like kind of the straw that broke the camel's back. So.
Yep. Okay, moving along.
Number 5, Harrah's betting big on New Orleans. That is multiple ways. Obviously, we've seen now the Superdome with the big new name on it. That's a 20-year naming rights. And then they have come in with a $325 million worth of renovations that are going to be done between what's going on now, but they're supposed to finish up in 2024. That's going to include a 340-room hotel and a live performance theater. It's going to mean a lot of jobs, 600 during the construction phase and an estimated 500 after that. And just a huge investment in the city by a really big name.
Number 4.
Number 4, we have, we're talking about the real estate industry. So we do an entire issue on this in October. Basically, the short of it is residential did really well, breaking records, continuing to break records. Multifamily did well. Rents are up. I mean, if you own multifamily, that's good. If you're trying to get an apartment, it's not as good.
Yeah.
And then industrial, the warehousing, that's coming from the e-commerce boom. So we're getting a lot of warehousing, manufacturing, logistics, those kind of products are doing really well. The bad side has been predictably the retail, the restaurants, the places that aren't doing well, that are shutting down, obviously. That's hurting. And then office space. People are working remotely, and they're realizing sometimes they don't need the size.
Right.
So.
Okay, next one.
3, Hollywood South returns. Yes. So that's exciting. It's another industry when we're trying to really diversify our economy. A lot of effort has gone into this in trying to get our film industry going, and this has been huge this year. $753 million to the city in the first 3 quarters of 2021.
A lot of productions around. Okay, let's go to number 2.
Number 2, hotels. So weirdly enough, I mean, obviously we have been hit as a tourist city, but we also had a whole lot of hotel openings this year.
Right.
The most notable of which is Four Seasons, $450 million renovation of the former World Trade Center, and some big names involved with that, Alon Shaya and Donald Link having restaurants in there. And then our first 5-star hotel.
I got to move you to number 1.
All right, number 1 is our tech titans. The big news this year was our 3 big exits: Lucid, Turbo Squid, and Level Set. And our first unicorn, our $1 billion plus exit, which will be huge for the entrepreneurial industry.
Wonderful. That's really very exciting. Thanks a lot, Kim. Very encouraging list.
Thank you.
All right, E, over to you. Let's take a look at some sports stories. I got a couple of minutes to do this.
Well, you look back at the whole year and you can summarize the big moment with one thing, 9-0. The score of the game last week. Tampa Bay was really part of the story in that we've won all the regular season games with them. Unfortunately, we lost the game that counted the most, and that was the game that would have gotten us into the Superdome. So once again, we got right next to being in the Superdome and lost.
Super Bowl.
So, yeah. And the Super Bowl. The Pelicans started off really bad, but lately they're doing good. And you got a feeling they have a new coach, they have new players, and I'm starting to feel a little bit more optimistic about the future of the organization. And so, if they can get that, they're going to need that to develop a fan base. LSU football, usually that's a source of big excitement. It was a disappointing season. It was they didn't do too well, and then you had the whole thing with Orgeron being fired and then being replaced by Kelly from LSU. So it wasn't the kind of season that you were looking for. And in one sports event, I'd like to emphasize, because it doesn't seem to get the attention it deserves. Yeah, it's really good. And that's the fairgrounds. We have a great racetrack in New Orleans. The season is open, and I urge everybody just to go and sit down and get a corned beef sandwich and a beer and just watch the horses run.
So interesting sports year, and hopefully we'll have an even better sports year coming up. We
used to have a guy on this show, and every year for this show, he predicted the Saints would be in the Super Bowl next year. So,
well,
in one year he was right.
Well, we can always hope, right? And always believe, too. Of course, we're going to believe that. Okay, guys, this is the year-end show, so we're going to be moving into a new year for our next show. But what are your predictions, just sort of overall, for 2022? E.
Well, if we don't have a hurricane, it could be a great year because everything is bouncing back. We're going to presume that COVID will have diminished, that things are in place. That people haven't been coming to New Orleans. I think a lot of people who want to travel, who don't necessarily want to go to Europe still. And so if you don't want to go to Europe and you live in and you live in the United States, let's go to New Orleans. And so I see a real boom in tourism. And then the other part of it is with the riverboats, like the Viking cruises, which is a huge business. So I think it's going to be an enormous business, an enormous year in tourism. And the Jazz Fest, which we haven't had one in 3 years now, I think people are going to really welcome it back just because they hadn't seen it so long. It's also going to be the 50th anniversary, and they're going to get a lot of publicity for that. So I think it's going to be a really, really big Jazz Fest this year.
John, over to you.
Oh boy, predictions. I don't know. I think we're going to start seeing trials in criminal court in Orleans Parish, like a lot of them, and I think we're going to have problems getting jurors in with the COVID. I'm not sure. We'll see.
There's a big backlog over there, criminal court in Orleans.
There've been a lot of trials waiting to happen. Yeah.
Okie doke. Kim, over to you.
My hopeful prediction is that we'll see more of these exits in the entrepreneurial sector, and that we will get some more people coming in on gaming, entertainment, attracted by those incentives.
Okay, so I'm hearing that you guys see a good year ahead. I sure hope you're right. We could all use it, couldn't we? Thanks a lot for being here. Thank you all for joining us. And we certainly do wish everybody a very, very happy New Year. Happy New Year for us all. And we will see you again in the new year next week for Informed Sources. Have a good evening.